Good morning and welcome all to today's Radon Forum. A problem, but whose problem? I'm Anthony McNichol, the NCLOG Events Coordinator. The housekeeping for today's event: all cameras and mics should already be off unless you are a presenter. If you do have access to them, please ensure cameras and mics are off for the duration of the meeting. Today's presentations are being recorded and will be available to watch back or share on the IES YouTube channel, which is just one of the benefits of being part of the IES family. The panel session will not be recorded, so we'll be able to have a more open discussion. There will be a chance to ask questions after each presentation. Could I ask you to use the Q&A function for questions and use the chat function for general comments? Following presentations, we'll be holding a panel session with all our presenters, so please think of any questions for the panel session as the day progresses. As CLOs, we're used to dealing with the weird and wonderful service requests, whether it's collecting a shovel, which someone thinks has given them a flesh-eating bug, or speaking to a panicked resident buying a house affected by a strange radioactive gas. The fact that radon queries often land on our desk is not unreasonable, as we have backgrounds in science and geology. Radon behaviour, risk assessment and remedial measures bear similarities to what we could term conventional ground gas issues. Two of today's presentations provided by local authorities show what I don't want to call a disparity, but more so highlights just how different authorities are dealing with the issue of radon. At NCLOG, we see our role as to promote the issue of radon and facilitate discussion with key stakeholders. Before we commence with our first presentation, we're going to have a poll. If you can pop that up, please, Ellie. Okay. Quite a rudimentary poll, but who do you think should be responsible for radon? Do you think it should be local authority, the contaminated land function, local authority, the building control function, BC, or government agencies? I'll just give you a moment if everybody can try and complete the poll and submit, please. Let's give you a minute for that. And then we'll discuss the results of the poll later. I'll do that myself as well, actually. So, okay, hopefully we'll have a chance to do that. Our first presentation, An Introduction to Radon, is provided by a familiar face to NCLOG, John Naylor from Ground Gas Solutions. The continued support for event content from John and GGS is very much appreciated and is not taken for granted. Our first presentation will set the scene for what will follow today. John is ideally placed to deliver the opening presentation, given his experience in radon risk assessment and his role in the Radon Council. John has over 20 years professional experience working within the contaminated land and landfill arenas, both the public and private sectors. He has worked to improve the contaminated land investigation, assessment, remediation and verification at both consultant and regulatory posts. A pioneer of continuous ground gas monitoring methodologies, John has helped to establish guidance in ground gas issues, working closely with professional bodies, consultants, local authorities and landowners, as well as developing verification and validation practice and training. John is a chartered environmentalist and is an active member of several organisations, including the British Verification Council, the Radon Council, where he's the current vice chair, and he has helped author and has also been part of steering groups for several documents related to ground gas matters and regularly provides training to fellow professionals. So, John, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony, for that really good introduction. My word, it's making me sound old. All right, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully we can I've got the easy bit today. I've got to do the introduction to radon, so hopefully you can all see that.
got that. Yes, thanks, John.
Yeah. Just to update here is that I am from GGS. I'm actually here with my Radon Council hat on. So this presentation is being delivered on behalf of the Radon Council. And it's just to give you sort of the views of the Radon Council as an introduction. So a quick question first for you guys is, how seriously should we be taking radon? I could have done with a poll that you've just set up, but never mind. But I don't want you to answer this one. Just keep it in your head. And I asked this one at a few of the presentations because it all depends on your audience as to what these answers pop out at. I have a feeling what a lot of you guys will be thinking. Hopefully it's not the last one, but if it is, fair enough. We'll hopefully learn something today. So yeah, if you think of those, we'll see where we are. So I'm just going to go through what I call the 5 W's of radon. What is it? Where is it? What the regulation and guidance is available? What's the problem? And what we can do about it. There are some really good speakers coming up, so I'm going to really fly through some of these slides because they're going to cover it in much more detail than I will. And I don't want to steal any of their thunder. So we will fly through these, and I've got about 20 minutes of a bit less to get through it. So what is radon? Well, it's an atom, a noble gas, and funnily enough, as we've already introduced today, it is actually radioactive. So this thing decays. It's very, very dense, so about 8 times heavier than air. And as far as the human senses go, we can't see it, we can't hear it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, and you can't touch it. So there we go. A gas you can't actually detect, and it's an atom. Okay, we've said it decays. Here's a little bit of a slide just to remember what half-lives are. So after basically how long does it take for half the activity to decay? In radon's case, it's 3.825 days, which is quite a good amount of time for it to get into our buildings and decay. And as you can see, after maybe sort of just over 15 days there, we've had 4 half-lives. So a lot of the actual radon decays occurred. What that doesn't mean, though, is that as if the radon just came in and we then could be able to shut it off. In reality, it's coming in and out all the time where it's present. But what about radon progeny? So it's a highly radioactive metallic, well, this is what decays to, metallic particles, okay? And some of these give off alphas. Okay, and that's the thing we're worried about when it comes to the radiation type from radon. Okay, so here's the decay series in a nutshell. So it comes from uranium 238 in the soils, that decays to radium, that decays till we get to radon 222, which is the gaseous form. We get an alpha emission there as it decays to polonium, which is one of these heavy metallics. Look at the half-life now, 3 days. Then we go to lead, unstable lead, across to bismuth, polonium, and another alpha on there, microseconds there, before we get to a more stable lead. And then the final one, some 22 odd years later, if it's still there, the final alpha. So when we talk about radon and the health effects, what we really mean is radon and all these other things going off. Okay. What are the units when we're talking about radon? Is essentially in Europe and in the UK is the becquerel. Okay, and this is how many radon atoms actually disintegrate per unit of time. So 1 disintegration per second. So 1 becquerel is 1 disintegration per second. And if we're expressing this in cubic meters, if you think about a big Amazon box, you get a meter by a meter by a meter. Okay, and if you click your fingers once a second, that's 1 becquerel. That's how it's measured. But of course, the world uses a lot of other different measurements. America likes curries and picocurries, and if you're measuring dose to people's exposure, that's measured in different units, sieverts and millisieverts, or maybe working levels, the old version. But we do live in a naturally radioactive world. And just some headline numbers here of how many actual radioactive stuff's going on around us. So just the cosmic stuff, 100,000 of those every hour, and 400,000 secondary pass through us every hour. When we look at radon, we might be looking at about 30,000 atoms each atom. And then gamma, 200 million of those pass through as the average individual. And then, in our diet, just what we eat can actually cause, a lot of potassium faulty acids, things like bananas. That stuff's in there as well. So we actually do live in a radioactive world. When it comes to UK radiation dose for the annual average person, you can see what the percentages of where the sort of stuff comes from, and this is expressed as a dosage, so millisieverts there. And of course, I've left that big yellow one at the bottom out there, and of course that is radon. So, to be honest, half of what we get exposed to every year, just living, is from radon. Okay, and that's based, I think, on the 20 becquerel average we get in our homes. If we look at how much of that radon gas is actually in the environment, well, here's our kind of nearly accurate atmospheric mix of gases. So most of it's nitrogen, oxygen we need to breathe, so on and so forth. So you can see the numbers are getting smaller and smaller. And with radon, and this is just actually to get us, what's actually in the atmosphere. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny number. So you can see we don't need a lot of it to cause us problems. Where's it coming from? I'm going to leave these two lovely maps to our other speakers, and you'll hear lots more about those soon. But it's basically from rocks and sediments with elevated uranium content in the ground, and of course can travel and migrates through water as well. Okay, we can get some contribution from building construction materials. I've come across that in a couple of properties now, not a lot of them, and also sometimes from the groundwater. So if you've got a private water supply and you're pulling groundwater out, using that for drinking water after treatment, it could have dissolved radon in there. Okay, how does it get into the building? Well, pretty much any way it can, and interestingly, a lot easier than maybe some of the other gases. So cracks, joints, gaps, anything in there as well, coming through, follow surfaces up through the annulus into the building. It will go through pore spaces over time if there's a lot of radon. And what drives that in? Well, we've got the stack effect and basically wind Bernoulli effect blowing across the house that basically make your house a little bit more negatively pressurized. It then will drag soil gases in from underneath the property. But also we heat our houses, and particularly in winter, the stack effect is going to be more significant. And again, that will drag radon and soil gases through into the home, particularly as in winter we've got our windows and doors closed. So what are the levels we're likely to see in different houses? Well, let's just take 4 houses all next to each other, and you kind of think, scientifically, logically, well, maybe they've all got a similar amount of radon. But what is typical is that might not be the case, and indeed it's usually not the case, because the way that these houses are used by the individuals using them will be very different. So radon, given how much volumetrically you need to have a problem, it can be massively different. Okay, so radon levels vary markedly out to our day-to-day and between seasons. And to a limited extent, we can see differences in severity of winters and summers with rainfall. And it wouldn't be a presentation from me if we didn't have some continuous data. So there we go, a time series graph showing the variation of radon over 18 days, 19 days in a property with 3 floors. Okay, and you can see we've got a radon problem clearly in this particular building, but you can see the variability that goes on there. Okay, I'm not going to go into the case or the case study of what it is. It just to demonstrate the high variability you can get, but also to put a point out that it's not necessarily always the basement. And indeed, we found this in first floors, ground floors a lot of the time, but also in lofts and attics. So just be aware once it's in, it can travel. So there's a bit of legislation. So Building Safety Act. This is relatively new. I think most of the industry is still trying to get to grips with it. But it adds a lot more power to accountability. And this basically came out of what happened, the tragedy at Grenfell. And it does really focus on fire safety, but it basically brings in anything where there's a safety system in place. You need to make sure that you're following this act. Okay. And this is where I think radon protection falls into this act, because I see this very much as a safety feature for buildings. We're keeping a hazardous gas as low as we can away from the occupants. That's my view. We've got planning, so there's probably more of you on this presentation now understand a lot more about planning than I can actually remember these days. But there we go. We've got our Town and Country Planning Act, which eventually end up with planning permissions and conditions. We've obviously seen the advent of a lot of conditions for contaminated land and specifically for ground gas. Not seeing so many for radon, which is interesting. And maybe a discussion point later. And maybe it's because we're putting all of it on the Building Act, which I think from the poll earlier when we started this would make sense. But this is really where radon comes in, and it's not actually in the sort of primary guidance, other than it needs to be kept under C1 of that to make sure it's reasonably free, whatever reasonably stands for. Okay, and then to support that, this is where radon's mentioned, approved document C, and it specifically covers radon in sections 2.39 and 2.4. Okay, unfortunately, this is quite old. It doesn't reference a lot of the newer documents, but there you go. So it basically says guidance to radon protective measures appropriate in areas where 3 to 10% foams and full rate protection measure required, where there's more than 10% foams are predicted to have radon at or above the radon action level of 200 becquerels. So that's that map I showed you earlier and is going to be talked about later. Just as a note, in Scotland, they've actually gone for 1%. Why we're at 3? Maybe we can discuss that too. What else is there? Well, we've got the UK National Radon Action Plan. I'm going to leave that there for now. That basically is one of the outputs from one of the Euratom European Directive. One of the last things I think we signed up to, where we're going to say what we're going to do about radon as a nation. We've got the private water supplies regulations, which now include radon, and we got Part 2A of the EPA. Hold on a minute, that's not for naturally occurring radon. No, it's not. But it does include radiation from other sources, which can include radon. So what are the action target levels? So in a home, so this is the home, okay? If you've got, or you find you have average radon levels above 200 becquerels, then you should do something about it. And ideally, if you do something about it, we have a target level, whereby you should try and get the number below 100. And of course, these are lovely fixed numbers at around point, 101 doesn't mean you failed, and 99 doesn't mean you've succeeded. It's just some, these are the numbers that are there. Okay, and this is an existing and new builds. Okay. If you've got smokers or ex-smokers in your room, then they're likely to be more susceptible to radon because they've already probably caused some damage to their lungs. And I think the statistics are about it's an order of magnitude more for those guys. Okay, we've got our health and safety stuff. Okay, there it is. Administered by the HSE, and we have to do it. Okay. And and then on top of that, we have the main things that drives a lot of the radon is ionizing radiation regs. Okay, so there's a legal obligation for employers, okay, to ensure that they are meeting those requirements of the IR 17. They're under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And if in extension, what we say here is if your radon levels are below 300 becquerels annualized average in the workplace, then this Act regulation doesn't apply. But above this, you need to reduce workplace exposure. So what does that mean? Actually, there's quite a few duties on you there as an employer. So if it is above 300, then you've got to notify the HSE. It is a legal requirement. At that point, and if not before that, you've probably needed to have got yourself engaged with a radiation protection advisor, not a radon specialist. In that case, you will need a radon specialist, but there's a specific definition of radiation protection advisor, and they might then put in other rules and have that monitored under a radiation protection supervisor under pretty much supervised areas. Okay, and basically get your building fixed. Okay, the one thing to remember here is if you've got a radon problem and you fix it, that radon's still going to be coming into that building, or it's going to be still there. So if that, whatever you've done to fix it, starts to fail or you change things, you've got to still make sure that that system works. And just to give you an example as to why, HSE took action against a school in Bath. Some of you have probably heard of this, and got a big fine. Okay, the fine was really because they didn't take action after they'd been asked to. Okay, they put radon protection systems in, but they failed to monitor and they failed to maintain those systems. So just be aware. Okay, because we've got this duty of care, and where we fail our duty of care, it's not great. It's looked at negligence, and then obviously we can all get sued potentially, so on and so forth. And if you've read the papers lately, you'll find that there is an action going through at the minute regarding to a certain prison. So what does it do? Well, we breathe it in into our lungs, we breathe most of it out. Some of that decays, I think we said before, about 30,000 atoms. We breathe that out. But over time, if we keep damaging these cells, we can eventually lead to DNA damage, which potentially can cause a cancerous mutation. And effectively, the problem with radon is it is no cause of lung cancer. So what does that mean? In reality, well, if we think about the whole of contaminated land, how many people are dying prematurely of contaminated land? I don't think we've got proper statistics for that. But with radon, it's estimated, and this number changes, but let's say over 1,000 to 2,000 people per year are dying prematurely because of lung cancer through radon exposure. Okay, that's a big number. And when we put that in context of car fatalities per year, okay, the numbers are on the similar order of magnitude. Can you think how much money goes into car safety? Yeah. What's interesting, and I've yet to get my head fully around this, is that most of those 1,100 are from concentrations below 100. Bear in mind what our action level is. And of course, we get a close association with smoking. So an easy comparison. And this is some US EPA data. At 74 becquerel, so below our target level, would be 1,200 x-rays, and it's 7,500. I mean, I'm not a smoker, but I think people have struggled to smoke 80 cigarettes a day. Okay, so not very nice, but I suppose the smoking is voluntary. So what can we do about it? Well, we can raise awareness, we can educate people, robust regulation. This is a great point for what we're doing today. Get some training done, and what can we actually achieve? So a few questions there, and with that, I am done.
That's great. Thanks, John. That sets the scene perfectly, I think, for us for the rest of the day. And I think it's always a shock, even when you see the numbers, you know, of relatable deaths. It's it's just hard to comprehend sometimes, the radon issue. So I'm now going to pass over to Phil for the questions that have been submitted for John. Thanks, Phil.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Anthony. Just a couple of questions, John, if that's okay. The first one, can radon be considered under planning if it needs occupational monitoring to assess the risk?
I wouldn't see why not. I think we've got in the mindset that it's a building control function. It doesn't necessarily have to be entirely a building control function. I think that's again something to discuss around the regulators, because they'll be much more clued up with the planning legislation than I am. But I think at the time when I was a regulator, I was wondering why we weren't dealing with it under planning.
Thanks, John. Next one, probably a bit more general. Can you clarify what the Radon Council is and what it does, what its function is?
Sure. So the Radon Council is effectively a self-regulatory body, and it was set up over 25 years ago because there was obviously some of these regulations came in, and the government was worried about basically a mass sales going out, and a lot of cowboys in the industry going around offering all kinds of mitigation and basically ripping people off because they didn't know what they were doing. So it's a self-regulatory body for industry professionals, and it's open to pretty much anybody who's interested in radon. And we hope to basically educate not only our own members and bring them up to speed with what to do in various scenarios, but also we try and lobby where we can, and we do training events. Again, it's open to everybody, including members. Well, we provide training for what radon is and how we deal with it. In a nutshell, that's the Radon Council.
Oh, great stuff. Thanks, John. Memories of roof cleaning scams then. So preventing that kind of thing going on.
That kind of thing.
And the last one, do we have the right guidance? Or is it the case that it's not been interpreted or used correctly?
Well, that's an open-ended question, isn't it, that one? I think all of the above. I think we've got great guidance. I think we've got very loose guidance. And I think a lot of people read what they want to hear, and not necessarily what the spirit of some of that guidance is about.
Cool. Great, thanks for that. And finally, before we move on, should councils and other employers be testing for radon in their buildings routinely?
If they're in a radon affected area, they should be. Or if they're in a basement.
In a basement, yeah. Okay, thanks for that, John. Back to you, Anthony.
Thanks, John. And you've managed to segue the next presentation perfectly there, John. So that was probably intentional, but thank you. We'll see more of later of John in the panel discussion. Yeah, thanks again, Phil. Okay, our second presentation, addressing radon in basements and so-called non-affected areas, is by Robert Tyler, the Senior Contaminated Land Officer at the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Robert has dealt with contaminated land and local government for 25 years, with over 15 years spent working in London. Apart from full range of Part 2A planning work, career highlights have included working on the 2012 Olympics and more recently being directly involved in the Grenfell environmental checks process and serving the communities he's worked for. Robert is on the steering group of the West and East London Land Contamination Officers Group, attends the National Brownfield Forum, and has previously served as a committee member on the Geological Society Land Contamination Group and the National Contaminated Land Officers Group. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Hello, everyone. What I'll do is I'll just get my presentation set up, and if you could let me know when you can actually see the presentation.
We've got that. Thanks, Robert.
Yep, that's great. Let me just minimize. Right. So yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks, John. You covered everything that I'd hope you were going to cover, so hopefully my presentation will make sense. As the title suggests, I'm here to talk about addressing radon in basements in non-affected areas. Oh. Right. Sorry, my computer stopped working for a bit then. Yeah, so I'm going to cover a bit about RBKC, a quick look at radon gas. I shouldn't be kind of repeating too much that John said already. Why it's of interest and kind of the approach that we've been working on in RBKC over the past 5 or 6 years. So in terms of RBKC, many of you will know we're in Inner London Borough. We have quite a few residents, just over 150,000, and we got about just under 90 kind of housing units in the borough. And some people would be surprised to know that 20,000 of those social housing units. And I've included the map there. You can see that we're kind of nicely positioned in a kind of a non-affected area where radon potential is less than 1%. Of course, that's at ground level. It doesn't strictly cover basements. So kind of what's the problem? I think it's always worth just kind of repeating and reiterating a few things. As John's kind of said, radon's a class 1 carcinogen. So as regulators, a LARP applies. So we got to reduce radon to as low as reasonably practicable. It's also, there's loads of statistics for kind of the impacts of radon. But the one that always strikes me is that for every additional 100 BQs per meter cubed of exposure received, that increases your baseline lung cancer risk by 16%, which to me seems quite significant. And the other one is that kind of the estimate of 1,100 cancer deaths. I mean, it's a statistic. It could be far higher, might be lower. We don't really know. And as John's kind of suggested, the risk is disproportionately felt by kind of smokers and ex-smokers quite significantly, but you can still see that even if you're a lifelong non-smoker, that there's still kind of elevated risks with increased exposure. So in terms of kind of reducing indoor radon levels in homes, what are we comparing it against? John's very nicely described the relationship between kind of action levels and target levels. And I think you've really got to look at what the UK National Radon kind of action plan sets out. And it's basically that if you're above an action level, the advice is that you should reduce radon levels. But if you're above a target level, you still should be seriously considering reducing levels. And yeah, that's disproportionately felt by smokers. I've kind of recently found quite a nice little risk assessment tool on the UKHSA UK Radon website. And kind of if you can kind of go through and kind of input the radon levels in your property, identify whether you're a smoker, and if you fall between that 100 to 200, within that 100 to 200 range, and you're a non-smoker, this tool actually tells you that you have a low risk, although you can, if you want, get advice on how to reduce risk further. But I mean, if you're one of the 20 million kind of ex-smokers or smokers in the country, then the recommendation is that you, within that range, radon concentration range, you look to reduce your risks further. I thought, I mean, everything's AI these days, so I thought I'd just plug in, should planning authorities protect residents from radon in basements? And according to kind of Google AI, the answer is yes. I thought that was kind of interesting. So anyway, why is radon of interest to RBKC? Over the years, it's been very newsworthy. So many of you will have heard of the super basements, mega basements that were kind of beginning of this century, kind of the early 2000s. And basically you've got these icebergs of properties where you've got 20–30% of the property above ground, and then kind of these huge basement structures kind of beneath the ground. Every so often, basements cause buildings to collapse, which, as you can imagine, a borough like RBKC can be quite significant. So, I mean, that property you're looking at there could be anything between £5 and £20 million, depending on where it is in the borough. So it's quite a large insurance job. Also, I mean, like a few other boroughs, particularly in London, we have a huge number of basements being developed on a year in, year out basis. So, I mean, typically in a year, you might expect to see between 200 and 500 basement applications. And of course, not all of those will be developed, but I mean, even if kind of half of them are developed, that's still a lot of basements being built. And I mean, over the last century or so, properties have been built with basements. We don't actually know how many basements there are in the borough. We also have various kind of radon monitoring data. So kind of locally, 5 or 6 years ago, we were provided with some radon monitoring in healthcare facilities in central London, kind of including RBKC. And that suggested that kind of 8% of basements were above the target level, despite being a non-affected area. And I mean, even 3% or kind of one basement was above or kind of coming not too far away from the action level. And it kind of illustrates the problem we have, really, that we don't have enough data to really get the full picture of what the situation is. There's also, many of you will be aware of the kind of work by UK Radon, the Radon Public Health England, as it was back then, radon in workplace basements, which kind of suggested in non-affected areas that between kind of, depending on the type of use, between 5 and 15% of basements were above kind of 400 BQs per meter cubed in non-affected areas, which is kind of quite kind of astounding, really. And I suppose there's slight clarification needed there, because since that study was published in 2016, non-affected area boundaries non-affected areas have reduced in size. So it's quite possible that those figures are a bit lower now, but still they're likely to be kind of significant. And again, we don't know for sure. So moving on. So why is this of interest? I mean, you've got, I mean, John's given quite a nice overview of the regulations, and this talk, it's mainly about kind of small residential basements, and so I mean, health and safety comes into play. Quite a few properties or households will have kind of live-in help in the borough. Building controls, very significant, particularly for basements. And in both cases, the clear kind of advice is from the HSC and set out within BR 211 is that all basements are at increased risk of elevated levels of radon, and that's irrespective of where they are. Also quite helpful advice is that a kind of a well-constructed waterproofing should be designed to protect against radon. And I mean, I don't know about the others kind of talking today, but kind of regularly come across situations where kind of waterproofing to be used for kind of radon protection has been verified, and you find a lot of faults with it that need kind of further remediation, which is kind of obviously significant. And then there's the question of planning requirements, and I mean, within the borough, we're in a non-affected area. At ground level, the kind of the risks are identified as kind of being low. So typically, we don't look to address radon within at ground level. But in terms of basements, strictly across the country, I mean, typically basements are permitted development across most of the country, so you can't necessarily deal with them through the planning regime, along with a few other kind of councils within London and maybe elsewhere. RBKC has an Article 4 direction, which has removed the permitted development rights, so we can actually kind of regulate basement developments through planning. And I haven't reproduced it here, but we have kind of a pretty strong local plan policy, which requires that land contamination issues and radon are addressed through the planning process. So, yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out that the planning practice guidance, although we can't strictly deal with natural radon under Part 2A, planning practice guidance does suggest that we can deal with it through the planning regime. But as was kind of the question earlier, I think there is a lot of conflicting information and guidance, and there's often not a great deal of clarity. So, for example, I mean, BR 211. I mean, if you read the introductory chapters, you wouldn't really kind of understand that we should be addressing radon in basements in non-affected areas. It's only when you look at the chapter on kind of basements. And I mean, in terms of, I mean, I hadn't said about kind of building control. I mean, in areas like in kind of London and other big cities, a lot of building control work is carried out by private companies, probably 80% or more. And I mean, in non-affected areas, but also to a degree in affected areas, a lot of those building control officers won't necessarily be dealing with kind of radon properly, or in non-affected areas even kind of considering it at all. I mean, one cause of that is, I mean, if you do some of the environmental searches that are available, most of them, if you're in a non-affected area, will kind of simply advise that kind of radon protection measures aren't needed within buildings, which I think is kind of misinformation personally. So in terms of the approach that we've built up, I mean, as I've said, we look to deal with radon through the planning regime for basements in the borough because we can. And as it's through planning, as you can imagine, we have conditions and we have guidance. And in terms of the conditions, we've got CLC3 conditions for kind of small scale developments. And that kind of looks to address ground gas and vapor issues, and it deals with various issues. So it's kind of requires the collection of environmental and historical information. It requires kind of soils and fills used above basements to be kind of verified to check they're suitable for use. It sets out what we require in terms of unexpected contamination. But as you'll guess, it also has requirements for kind of radon. And I think it's really important to stress that we are subject to the 6 planning tests. And so kind of anything we require through planning, it does need to be necessary and reasonable. So it's very important to think about what's proportionate. So we've got CLC3 guidance, which is available online if you want to see it. I would warn you, it's very out of date. We do have an updated version that we're kind of trying to publish. It's held up with planning at the moment. But we've also we also asked the Environmental Protection Group, so Steve Wilson and co, to develop some guidance for us for radon in RBKC and basements. And that it's currently draft. So what I'm presenting today is draft, and it could be kind of tweaked. But we're very happy with what Steve's produced. As you can imagine, there's a kind of very robust kind of introduction, details about radon and basements in the borough, legislation and guidance. There's quite a bit of information provided on radon monitoring and risk assessment, which I'll touch on a bit later. And as you would hope, there's also some kind of really good information on radon protection. So that includes both kind of what measures you would expect in basements, and also kind of how those should be verified. And it's very much, as kind of touched on kind of earlier, it's very much focused on using the structure and what's been installed in the basement to protect against radon, and just making sure that that's done properly. So that includes things like waterproof, kind of ensuring that waterproof concrete, insulation materials, kind of radon or waterproof membranes or cavity drains are kind of fitted properly. And the list there, it's in kind of preferential order, the most preferred option being waterproof concrete. So it's interesting that kind of one of the least effective methods, cavity drains, is one of the most commonly used approaches to radon protection, definitely in RBKC and probably across the country. One of my favourite tables is this kind of a flow diagram, which kind of helps kind of applicants understand when they need to address radon, because not radon won't need to be considered in relation to all parts of the borough, or kind of for all basement types. So if your basement has been built into the London clay in the north of the borough, you don't need to consider radon protection. If you're using waterproof concrete in appropriate membranes or steel sheet piling with welded joints, as you can probably imagine, you don't need to consider radon protection. If you've done the in-ground kind of monitoring and permeability testing in order to kind of calculate a radon index, it's also judged that in RBKC you wouldn't need kind of radon protection measures, but we would want to see some sort of radon protection in all other basements. That's just a kind of quite a nice little table that explains the relationship between soil gas radon concentrations and soil permeability when calculating a radon index. So the guidance also looks at probably the most common reason for radon getting in sealing of surfaces, but it also looks at specifications of materials for radon barriers. And that's particularly important in kind of basements, because you do have additional stresses on membranes, particularly when they're kind of vertically mounted. And so, for instance, I mean, quite often you see installers or membrane designers recommending 0.3 or 0.4 mil thick membranes, whereas really kind of any membrane for a basement should be at least kind of 0.6 mil. Sorry, I've lost my place then. And of course, we have the whole thing of long-term maintenance. I put somewhere in the presentation, kind of on the bottom, that a basement is for life, not just for Christmas. And I see quite a few developers, they may take kind of one kind of radon test after they've developed a property, and that might confirm that at that time radon levels are low. But I mean, these properties, these basements might be occupied for the next 50, 100 plus years, and over time kind of basement structures and membranes will degrade, and so we need to kind of account for that and build in kind of that extra precaution. So going back to the condition, I think one of the most important things of the condition is kind of what we ask for in relation to radon. So we ask that measures are fitted in line with the guidance I've just kind of set out. We ask that membranes are kind of verified by an appropriately accredited professional, i.e. someone qualified under the Clear Gas Protection Verification Scheme. And we ask that we have kind of proper kind of verification that that's been done. So personally, I don't think that's disproportionate. We're just asking that they demonstrate that they've kind of installed waterproofing measures that they were going to put in anyway within a basement to kind of ensure there's protection. We also have kind of an informative that should go on to every decision notice where there's a basement, which just sets out the kind of the policy requirements and guidance for radon. So looking to the future, I mean, we really want to kind of publish our updated and kind of new guidance. We've actually sought legal counsel on our planning work in general, and that's from King's Council, and we've been advised that our approach is kind of reasonable as long as we kind of ensure that it's proportionate. We also kind of do monitoring in council-owned basements, so I'll be interested to see the kind of the upcoming presentation on that. And yeah, like John, we kind of want to work towards a kind of a clear and consistent approach nationally, kind of wherever that's possible. So that's me. I don't know if we've got time for a few questions.
Thanks, Robert. Very interesting. Don't have many super basement applications up here in Stoke, but we've got large
maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future, but we've got a large terraced housing stock with a lot of cellars.
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
in like many northern towns,
Yeah.
so it's particularly apt for a lot of us. Even selling jest.
And as John was saying, I mean, if you've got a suspended floor, once it's in the cellar, the chances are you'll get into the floors above.
Bill, I'm going to apologise. Can we squeeze in one very quick question for Robert, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think thanks for the concise presentation. To be honest, we only have the one question really, and I think you might have touched upon it already, which is tanking systems. Do they really offer protection from radon, or is it complete mixed bag, or is it depending on who does it?
I mean, it's a good question, and I think the answer is it depends whether it's fit for purpose or not. And I think the challenge that there's been is that, I mean, the guidance on kind of general radon protection for ground level buildings is quite disparate. So it's very difficult to, I mean, you've got to look at a lot of different bits of guidance to pull together exactly what you should be doing to have robust mitigation. And I think the situation's slightly worse in basements. And so, I mean, that's why we've kind of developed this this kind of radon guidance for the borough. but obviously may have kind of wider application as well.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Welcome back, everyone. Our next presentation, the Radon Potential Map, Mapping an Invisible Gas Using Geology That We Can't Always See, by Russell, Lawley and Antonio Ferreira from the British Geological Survey. Russell is a geoscientist at the British Geological Survey and has over 35 years of experience in geological appraisal and spatial informatics. His main areas of expertise are in digital geological characterization for engineering, geophysical and geochemical purposes, notably for hazard assessment, ground conditions for shallow infrastructure, and more recently, development of shallow geothermal resources. For the last 20 years, Russell's primary role has been to oversee the delivery of the BGS digital geological products, which include the primary BGS geology mapping, BGS civils, and radon potential, jointly developed with the UK Health Security Agency. More latterly, his role is concerned with the challenges of knowledge transfer and communication of BGS information to an ever-widening stakeholder cohort at a time of significant change in data development and analysis and exploitation by humans and machines alike. Antonio is an experienced environmental geochemist working for the British Geological Survey since 2014. He has a 5-year graduate degree in geological engineering, a master's in geochemistry and a PhD in geosciences from the University of Aveiro in Portugal. Since his arrival at the British Geological Survey, he has been working on the statistical analysis of indoor radon data and geology in the frame of the collaboration with the UK Health Security Agency for the development and production of the radon risk maps in the UK. This led to the radon map for Great Britain, released in December 2022. He has been involved with the European radon community, contributing to the European Atlas of Natural Radiation, among other publications. So over to you, Russell and Antonio. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to give the main presentation, and I've called upon my colleague Antonio to back me up with the statistics. I'm getting too old to do all the fancy stuff with the computers. I'm just going to share this, and I'm hoping this works because sometimes this does complain. Hopefully you can see it in presentation mode.
Not yet. We haven't got it yet. Russell.
Can you see it yet?
No, can't see the presentation yet.
Oh, I love it when it does this. Bear with me 1 second. Let's try again.
That's looking promising.
How's that?
Bingo.
Oh, thank goodness for that. Never works, even when we practiced it. Right. Okay, so the radon potential map, mapping an invisible gas using geology we can't always see. So I'm going to do a super quick recap because I noticed that we seem to have slightly more people joined us after the quick break. So what is radon? I'm going to blitz through these. If you need these slides, you can contact me, but obviously you'll be able to access the video anyway. Okay, so radon is a radioactive noble gas. It's colorless, it's odorless. It comes from the ground. It's a product of decay from uranium. It's found in all rocks and soils. I'm going to keep stressing that, all rocks and soils to some degree. Half-life of 3.8 days, decays into polonium. Because it's a gas, it's mobile. Because it can hang around for quite a while, it can collect. And because it's gas, it will accumulate in natural voids and within your own house. If you live in a typical home, your exposure to radiation, your annual exposure to radiation from all sources, about half of it will come from radon, slightly under half. And multiple sources have studied this and identified radon as a cause of lung cancer. And a little quick cartoon on the right-hand side. Rocks behave differently, gases move around, and if it can find a route into your house, it will, because it can. And there is legislation that applies. I don't think I've covered everything here. I'm a geologist. I don't deal in the law. Basically, health and safety at work, management health and safety at work regulations, ionizing regulations, the Housing Act, the Building Safety Act. There's a slew of planning and building requirements that have come in. There is a new action radon plan in progress. I'm hoping Tracy can give us an update on that later on, but the current one is in play. And 2 criticalities: workplace action level is 300 becquerels, and private dwellings, the action is 200 becquerels. And BR 211 from the Building Research Establishment can provide guidance in reducing concentration for radon in new building extensions and all kinds of refurbishment projects. And there are slightly different requirements depending on where you are: England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. Okay, right. I'm now going to jump over the geology and go straight to the answers. So I do apologise, but this makes sure that everyone gets to see where the data comes from, just in case they've not seen a radon map before. So this is the most important slide as far as I'm concerned. It shows the probability of exceeding 200 becquerels cubic meter action level for dwellings. It's a map that we made in 2022. It is very similar to the map that was made in 2007 and re-released in 2011. Basically, there are 6 classes of radon potential, and the probability of exceeding them is calculated for each class. And basically, this is the free version that you can readily access online. Again, you'll be able to access these slides, or you can just take the links off the video later on. So the main website I'm going to send you to, if you need information at all, if you're completely new to this group, if you're completely new to radon, please go to ukradon.org. It is a goldmine of information about what to do with radon. If you're more familiar with radon and you perhaps want to know a bit more about the data set itself, then we host that on our server, so you can view it live as a map, just as you can at UK Radon, and you can interact with it via our GeoIndex service, basically. The important thing to bear in mind with this model, it's completely free to access, and you can download it into your own GIS if you want to, if you don't have to rely on our services or UK Radon services. But you need to bear in mind that it is a 1 kilometer resolution model, and it provides the worst case solution for that 1 kilometer. So in that little rectangle at the bottom, you can see the little town of Thrapston. I've picked it at random. It's got a large blob of class 6. More than 30 houses out of 100 will be affected. Rating, and basically those blocks are 1 kilometer in size. This map is derived from this one, which is the Radon Potential Map. This is the map that we make with our colleagues at UK Health Security Agency. Apologise. This is built from higher resolution data. So we're talking about using our 1 to 50,000 scale geology map, which more or less has national cover. We have to backfill 1 or 2 areas because we still haven't quite finished the geology map, unfortunately. And as you can see now, when you look at the bottom, the village of Thrapston can be split up in slightly more detail, basically. So I'm going to very quickly run you through how we arrive at a map which looks like this in its beautiful shades of purple and magenta. Okay, so again, this map shows the probability of exceeding 200 becquerel cubic meters action level for dwellings. The same 6 classes are in there. It's higher resolution, and basically it's made from the best source data we can provide from our end and the data that UKHSA can provide from theirs. This one is a licensable data set. So it's not freely available. You can't just go and grab it. You can't just download it, but you can find out more about it from the BGS website. And it will basically, if you follow that link, it'll take you to a web page that looks like this. If you're not familiar with BGS data and you need to know about other things like other ground gases, all of our data pages look like this. On the left-hand side, there's some key information about what the data might cost you if it's not free. And on the right-hand side, there's lots of options for you to go and have a look at it, read about it, do something with it. So I do recommend, again, if you're not familiar with radon or not familiar with how you get hold of data, if you suspect that you need to be doing something and you haven't done something, this is another good page to end up on. You can go and fill your boots, basically. Okay, so I've done the admin. Let's move on to a bit of geology, which I'm slightly more comfortable with. The little images that you've seen so far and the talks that have already been presented to you have kind of like conveyed everything you need to know. Radon escapes from geology and will get into your house. That's the be all and end all of it. I often get asked, isn't this just about granites? And that's partly historically because people have always associated radon with granite. It's not a granite problem on its own. It's a geology problem in the round, basically. And I'm then often asked, how do we know? Well, we know because BGS has done many years of research looking at the radioactivity of rocks in the UK. And we had our own map that we quite happily worked with for a very, very long time before we started working with UKHSA. I'm going to use the image here as a demonstration of how we know radon relates to geology. Geology doesn't answer everything. Geology answers about half the questions we should be answering, but geology gives us a great big heads up as to what might be going on. So what you're looking at on this image here, the bright sparkly colors, is the HiRes 1 radiometric project from 1998, where we flew 3 radiometric sensors on a light aircraft at 90 meters above ground level across Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. And you're looking at that map. That's the image we created. We know that the rocks are emitting radiation from the potassium, thorium, and uranium families, and we can see by blending those and using some false colors, we can relate them to geology. We can do that by comparing with a 170-year-old geological map, which will start to appear now. And basically, you can see that some of the areas stand out. It's a really, really simple geology. I've taken some of the detail off, but basically those sparkly colors, which are caused by interactions with the 3 different sensors, kind of like relate to spatial distributions of rocks and soils. We know that radon is highly mobile. So as well as being undetectable as such, what we're detecting here are all kinds of radioactive reactions, not purely radon reactions. We also know that it can get into rocks and move through them. So part of the issue we have with the geology map is it's not just about where the radon's coming from, it's how it moves around in the landscape. So one of the key things that intrigues me and intrigued us when we first spotted it, if you pay attention to the area on the left hand side, which is bright blue coming up now, that's the Derbyshire Dome. If you go walking in Derbyshire at all, those are the limestones that you will walk across. And if you'll notice, there is a little river coming out the south. It's a beautiful little area down here called the River Dove, and here is the River Derwent. And you will notice that the blue colors extend all the way down the river, all the way along to where they join the Trent. And you can, if you know how to play with the spectra, you can follow the uranium trace of those particles all the way out into the North Sea. And this demonstrates for me as a geoscientist that it's not just about granite, it's not just about bedrock, it's about all sediments in the sedimentary and erosion cycle, and it is part of all geological processes. So radon can move along faults, it can get into groundwater, it can be redeposited around the country just by its own mobility. But actually the uranium, which is its source, is being moved around the planet for the last 4.6 billion years, which is how we know it's everywhere. Now, obviously, different geological settings and processes will distribute it in different amounts, and certain rock types do have a habit of having more radon emissions than others. So granites are a hotspot, although not all granites, but granites are a hotspot, but also black shales and limestones and certain quaternary deposits, certain sandstones, certain chalks. We're starting to get a better handle on that. So if we know, for example, that some of the chalks that are exhibiting relatively high amounts of radon, it's possibly to do with phosphates in the chalk. And if you know your geology, it's fish poo, basically. So again, there's all kinds of reasons why radon could be there. It's not just about granites. And then the final one on this slide is human activities can influence near surface geology. So creating voids, removing layers, adding layers, leveling sites, draining sites. It all changes how a gas might move in the shallow subsurface. So, just going to move my pointer out of the way. Okay, so in the absence of a national radiogenic map, so that little map I just showed you, the bright colors, we don't have that everywhere. Other countries in Europe have started to fly radiometric sensors across the entire country. Ireland, I think, is almost complete. We don't have that. So we only have a geology map. Now, an awful lot of people think that our geology map is based on something like this scene here, where it's really, really obvious what's going on and there's rock sticking out of the ground everywhere. But what you'll notice in this lovely part of the world is there aren't many humans living there. So although it's lovely and it might be very radioactive, nobody's living there, so we don't need to worry about it quite so much. This is more like what a typical geologist at BGS will experience if they're lucky enough to work in a greenfield area. So they will see fields like that. And after 35 years, I know roughly what to do with this field. I know roughly how to interpret what's going on, and I can make a reasonable map. But already you can't see rocks in this. And already it starts becoming harder. So our level of uncertainty starts to creep up. The other thing about this is greenfield, and of course, there's still no houses here yet, and that's an important bit. By the time our rain-sodden geologist has made it to the city, you can start to see houses. That's good. There's a reason to be here, but you can also start to see complexities in the landscape. And the first complexity is that there's stuff in the way, so you can't see very much. And the geologist switches from using their eyeballs to see what's there to having to rely on boreholes and other sensor data, and that can be quite challenging. By the time you've made it to your front door, the chances are the rocks are in the walls and not anywhere else to be seen. And this becomes a real challenge for us. And so the key thing I'd like people to take away from today is an awful lot of people think geology is black and white. An awful lot of people don't realize that there is natural uncertainty in how you map geology. The 1 to 50,000 scale map can only do so much. And the shallow subsurface, the foundation level, where most activity is going on, is our biggest data challenge. It's really hard to see what's going on, but we can make a 2D map and start to compare parts of the country for the main geological characteristics, and we can start to apply some statistics from another source of information from UKHSA. And the way we do it is we use a source pathway receptor model, which I'm hoping some of you are already familiar with for all kinds of contaminated land purposes. Now, obviously, Robert's touched upon it, and I'd quickly chuck this slide in. The maps we make are 2D, and in reality, geology is 3D. So there is a house out of shot just behind the grass and the tufts of soil. For the purposes of this talk, maybe it's that sandstone at the top we need to worry about. Maybe, and I suspect it is, the blacker shales towards the middle of the image. And this is quite an old picture because geologists wouldn't be optimistically sat under a cliff like that with just a hard hat. But out of shot is a house, and out of shot, that house is receiving all kinds of interactions with the ground beneath it. We would love to be able to go and map every single individual house. This one would be really easy. It's built on sandstone. We kind of like know what's going on. But your typical house in the UK today looks like this. I know the house that this window was taken from very well because my daughter lives in it. I have no idea where the builder got that soil from, but it's certainly not a soil that relates to any of the geology in the area because I've mapped the geology in that area and the soils aren't that color and they're not full of whatever that material is in the garden. So there's all kinds of challenges when it comes to the modern building site because of the way they are so readily manipulated. So what do? We start with this and we try and build up from this to something else that we can apply some statistics to. And very, very simply, source pathway receptor model, we start with some geology. We add in 560,000 indoor radon measurements, and we apply a whole series of statistical models. And in 2007, we published the previous version, version 2, and then in 2022, we published the current version, version 3. And I'm not going to step into the statistics too much because basically they make me want to cry, although Antonio loves them to bits. Basically, BGS doesn't get to see exactly where house measurements are taken. Those samples are held under GDPR rules, and I'm hoping Tracy will pick up on this later on. We get to see summary statistics, and we summarize in two ways. We summarize by geology, and we summarize by 1 kilometer square. And the statistics from that summary exercise, most of which is actually performed by UKHSA, enables us to understand why certain combinations of geology might be towards the red end of a log normal distribution of radon, and why other types of geology may sit around the median or the lower end. And basically what you're looking at is a very complicated graph and a very complicated little formula, but it partitions the country into different parcels of land, and we try and pin our hopes that we've got our estimates right in that model. So in the last couple of years, the second most common question after is it not just granites is why have you changed the map? So I'm very quickly just going to check the time. Okay, I seem to be on time. Why did we publish a new version in 2022? Really simply, the previous version was compiled in 2007, and in 2022 we'd actually changed quite a lot of things about the geology map. Now, some of those changes, the pale grey areas you can see, that's just geologists doing what geologists always do. We change a name. So the Chester Pebble Bed Formation, for some reason, somebody decided we weren't allowed to use the word pebble in the name, so it became the Chester Formation. Those are changes which don't really make any difference to you as end users, but they're part and parcel of a whole ongoing process of updating the map. And the green areas and the blue areas are where we genuinely made new geological maps. In fact, if you can just about see it, the grey areas are the only areas that are exactly the same as the 2007 geological map. So we do change it, and it causes no end of trouble for us, not just for radon, but for all of our other products as well. Also, UKHSA had set to with the sampling and the measuring, and they'd also found an extra 80,000 sample points. So by 2016-17, we realized we needed to start compiling a new map. And that's when we actually started this task. So we revisited how we do it. And because we've got new data, because we've got new samples, and because we've all got a better computer, and because quite a few of us had actually got hold and some of us had retired, we decided we would look again at the geology itself and how we combined it. And the important thing to bear in mind is back in 2007, we used statistics to combine geology, but we also used a lot of expert judgment. So somebody just like me sat in a room and went, I think these two areas are very similar. Let's lump things together on the basis of their similarity. Nowadays, with better computing and better statistical methods, we can use the statistics more and say, okay, statistics, tell me a bit more about these rock types. How similar are they as far as you're concerned? Ignore what Russell feels as a geologist about their similarities. So that's why we had to change it. We had new information and it was overdue a change. Now it gets really tricky because this is where statistics really start to not be my friend. So this is the situation. So we've had a house, it's been built, and somebody has gone and had a measurement, and it's 100 becquerels. And as far as we were concerned, it's a single house on geology type A. There's a little bit of foundation material, and there's a little bit of pipe work entering the house. I'm sorry, there's quite a bit of noise on the line, so I'm struggling to hear myself there. When we introduce new data, such as a new geological map, we might discover that an area we thought we understood has now changed. So now we've introduced a new unit, say a geologist come along and said, actually, Russell, in this area, there's a glacial till or there's a sand and gravel, which is interposed between the house and the bedrock. That now causes trouble because the 100 becquerels still stands. That house is fine. It's been measured. It's 100 becquerels. It's at the target level. It's nowhere near the action level. But now myself and the team have to try and understand, okay, so was that new geology that we weren't aware of, was it acting as a barrier? Is that the source? Is it just acting as a pathway? What we thought we understood about Unit A, we thought it was that, we thought it was nice and easy, is now this, and it's not quite so straightforward. And then along comes three little pigs who want to build their house, and they start to ask questions like, okay, we're building a new estate in the area, we've bought some parcels of land. First parcel of land, it looks like we've got units A and B. What can you tell us about those areas? And we have to start asking ourselves, okay, so the statistics we'd built up in the first house suggested 100 becquerels, ballpark figure. There'll be a range, obviously. Not all houses over geology A and B will be 100 becquerels. There will be a range. But if it was in class 1, then all but possibly one sample out of 100 would be less than 200 becquerels. You can't automatically assume that units A and B, just on the basis of what we've now discovered, is going to be the same as the first house. There will be some variance, but we can start to make assumptions that maybe we're still in a class 1. Developer number 2 has bought land which is only Unit B, and Unit B has turned up new, and although we've got some numbers to do with Unit B, it's the original 100 becquerels from the first sample, and we know it's part of the equation, we don't really know enough about it now. We have to start looking around to say, okay, B is new kid on the block, what are we going to do about it? And of course, developer 3 has gone and bought the parcel of land where actually it was always Unit A. And of course, we were quite confident about Unit A right at the beginning. Hey, 100 becquerels on those houses. And now we're having to think a little bit more carefully about Unit A, because maybe Unit B has been a savior for the first house. It's been suppressing it. And then we add into the mix not just the change in the geology, but also someone has gone and built a house somewhere else on Unit B and A, and they've accidentally got a score which takes them over the action level. And now maybe they are the one house out of 100, so maybe it's still class 1, but also maybe when we start looking further at the new combination of B and A, we're starting to see that actually that combination might be more of a class 2, and maybe the first house just got lucky. And this is the problem we have with the statistics. You don't have to change very much in the geology, and you don't have to change much in the statistics to start changing the results. So what were the changes between the first version of the map, the second version of the map and the third version of the map? Okay, so we added 80,000 more results. We upgraded the map to the latest version for 2017, which was 5 versions later. And we changed the way we combine the geology, and that's partly to deal with getting rid of expert opinion. Expert judgment isn't repeatable, and we started applying more hierarchical statistics to try and do statistical pairings of combinations of rocks. The most detailed combination is bedrock and superficials, and there are now 9,323 combinations. And then we step back, cutting down the combinations, which allows us to draw more statistics together for the more unusual rocks that previously would have been lumped into a category by an expert. Hopefully, not many people would have spotted many changes. Obviously, I've had lots of inquiries from people who have spotted changes, and at least 2 or 3 of you are online today. A lot of the map didn't really change. 76% of the map really didn't change very much. Units that did change geologically tended to go up or down by a class. We did have some units that changed by more than a class, and they were interesting, basically. We have improved the modeling of the statistics, and we've made it slightly more future-proof. I'm going to stress this, we haven't used AI. I can imagine a time when AI will be deployed by someone to do this, but it won't be me because AI is beyond my comprehension. And we did some analysis, obviously, to see what the change was and where the changes were occurring, and the basic table is in front of you there. So areas where no measures are required have gone down slightly, and areas where basic measures are required have gone up, and areas where full measures are required have also gone up by 1%. We were asked quite a lot why we changed the colours. That was so we could tell if people were using the new map rather than the old map. So the colours were changed just so that we could be sure that people were looking at the latest data rather than the previous data, excuse me. And the map is now entirely digital. And again, that's partly to save money. It's also to make sure that people are dealing with live data, best current data. And basically, please remember the model is for guidance. So always get a test. Questions?
Thanks, Russell. And as you know, I was one of those authorities who were panicking when it was released, and as things changed quite significantly in Stoke, you messed everything up for me. It was easy before.
And the Stoke map was one of the newer maps, which was an eye opener for us as well. So,
yeah, but no, thanks both. I'm just going to pass over for Phil. Phil, apologies. Can we just limit it to a couple of questions, please, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Russell. First question, a bit of a hypothetical one. what if the number used on the radon map was based on 100 becquerels? What would that look like?
Oh, I genuinely, I can't answer that, and it would be really interesting because the log normal distribution, it's a log normal distribution. It's not a linear distribution, so you wouldn't get twice as much of an area. It would be substantially different. So I don't think we've ever looked at that. Antonio, super quickly, have we ever looked at changing that? We've never been asked to, so I don't think we have. You're on mute, Antonio. So
You're on mute.
Antonio, you're on mute, my friend.
Oh, sorry. I was saying I didn't do it at national level. I've done some little tests in, for instance, in Southwest when I was playing with the data there. Yeah, it can double. Like it's one of those things. But at national level, I have no idea how much would be the increase.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I suspect it's non-linear, and I suspect it would be more challenging. But then the legislation's not necessarily there. The critical values are 200 becquerels for dwellings and 300 becquerels for workplaces. So we could look at it for a research item, but it's not something we've done nationally.
And the last question in the that we'll have time for on this, will radon measurements will be focused on areas where radon is expected to be. How is the uncertainty dealt with, and what does it mean for things like basement?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I'd love to have a bit more time to unpack this. So yeah, part of the issue we've always had is that people, when they hear about radon, it triggers a ripple of inquiries, and maybe I'm hoping Tracy might pick up on this later on. There is a degree of spatial co-correlation, of spatial bias, in the fact that if people know they're in a radon area, they get more tests. So you start to have a self-fulfilling prophecy of everyone saying, oh, we've got this issue, and it becomes a snowball effect. The way we've repartitioned the data this time around, the geology data, is we focus on 1 kilometre squares, and we try and find statistics that relate to a 1 kilometre square and the geology within that 1 kilometre square. But because of the way we stratify the data based on geology, we can extrapolate and go further. We try not to extrapolate from Cornwall to Scotland. That's not the purpose behind the stats. But what we can do is we can try and compile groups of related statistics, and we can say, okay, within reason, these are an expected range for this rock type in this neighborhood or in this area. We can possibly talk more about uncertainty. Uncertainty with basements is really tricky. I briefly mentioned it in the slide, and I quickly chucked in some stratification as an image just to try and reinforce, I think it was Robert's point earlier on. That couple of 3 meters below the surface, humans have changed so much in where we live, and nature makes it its playground. So an awful lot of uncertainty goes on in that zone. So yes, the uncertainty gets broader in their area, which is why we always say get a test. And if you've got a basement, absolutely get a test.
Thanks for that, and that may be something that we can pick up later in the panel discussion. Any other questions we'll perhaps pick up later. Back over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I think there might be some other questions that have come in, so perhaps Russell may be able to answer those as we go on. Okay, moving on. Our penultimate presentation, Invisible Risk, Visible Action. Love that title. Planning and implementing a programme of radon monitoring in council properties, by Laura Toal, who's a specialist contaminated land officer at Renfrewshire Council. Laura has 20 years experience working in the contaminated land community in Scotland. She has worked both in the private and public sector, and is currently a specialist contaminated land officer at Renfrewshire Council, based in Paisley. She currently represents the Central and West local authorities on the Scottish Government's Contaminated Land Advisory Group, which provides a forum for dialogue and discussion between Scottish ministers and representatives of the contaminated land community. Laura has a bachelor's degree in environmental biogeochemistry and a PhD in environmental chemistry from the University of Glasgow. Laura says radon's a bit different than a usual day-to-day contaminated land workload, but fits well with a background and knowledge and interest in geology and environmental chemistry, which kind of corroborates what I said during my introduction. So thank you, and over to you, Laura.
Okay, I will just share my screen. Someone could tell me if you could see that, because I can't see anything now.
Not yet.
Not yet. It is this one.
Got it.
Got it now?
Got it. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, so thanks, Anthony. Thanks to this morning's earlier speakers. It's been a really interesting and insightful session so far. As is about to come clear to you all, we're one of the few local authorities, sorry Russell, that did notice a bit of a change when the maps were updated. And apologies in advance if I've mangled some of the explanations for why that might be. I'm one of the Contaminated Land team here at Renfrewshire Council, and I'm just going to talk you through the radon monitoring programme that we're currently implementing in council houses and a small number of workplaces and schools. So a wee bit of a spoiler alert before I start. We don't have any results back yet, as it's a work in progress. So I'm just going to be talking about how we've sort of planned the project and got it up and running. Not really about any sort of actions that we've taken to mitigate radon risks. Just to kick off then, a few facts about Renfrewshire for anyone who doesn't know where we are. This is us up in the central belt of Scotland. We're located just to the west of Glasgow. We've got a mix of sort of rural and urban characters, got some quite large towns, so Paisley, Johnstone and Renfrew, which you'll be hearing quite a bit about as I go through, and some outlying villages as well. So some of you might have heard of Bishopton that's mentioned on there, because we've got an ongoing redevelopment of a former Royal Ordnance factory into essentially a new town with 4,000 plus houses, but I'm not going to talk about that one today. So for context, we are the 10th biggest local authority in Scotland by population and the 24th biggest by area. So this is just a wee zoomed in view to show you the locations. You can see on there Paisley, Renfrew and Johnstone in the kind of southeastern area of our district. About 60% of our population lives in these three towns, and you'll see in a wee while why I'm focusing on those. So just to kick off with a wee bit of the geology, I thought it might be helpful just to have a quick run through of what we've got in Renfrewshire. So the green colour to the western and the central areas there are Clyde Plateau volcanic formations from the Carboniferous. The browns and blues and purples are also Carboniferous, but they are sedimentary rocks. The feature in black there is the Paisley Rock fault zone. This has a down throw of up to 500 metres in the northwest. One thing I didn't realise until I started researching this project was that the Paisley Rock was actually the focus of an earthquake in March 1964 that was felt all across Glasgow. That's one of the things I love about doing the job with CLO, that every day is a school day. The rocks in the Paisley Rock fault zone are really quite unusual. It's highly disrupted, structurally deformed, a range of different textures and materials going on in there. It's a wee bit of an oddity, as I understand it, because fault crush and gouge materials are usually not mapped at the 1 to 50k level, because these highly disrupted materials tend to sit between fault planes that are only a few centimetres or metres wide. In contrast, the Paisley Rock's about 200 metres wide. It's only present in a narrow ribbon, because it's not extensive. There's a very limited, if any, actual in-home radon measurements for that specific geology. Why are we interested in radon now? The radon maps have been around for years, so why are we looking at it? We have noticed quite a significant change in the mapping for our area for some small parts of Renfrewshire. So the Paisley Rock that we were talking about just there has been given a higher radon classification this time round. As I understand it, it was previously classified as same to the local sedimentary rocks, so the materials on either side of the fault itself, that have generally got a low radon potential. However, because this highly disrupted unit sits in close proximity to successions that also have igneous rocks, which are of a higher radon potential, statistically it's now classed along with those materials. Faults can extend across the landscape and connect different rock units together and act as a pathway as well as a source. So the interesting thing about the Paisley Rock is it was previously considered to be class 1, which was not radon affected, and it's now a class 6, where we would expect 30% or more of properties to be at or above the action level for radon. So just a wee quick comparison then, this is the previous edition of the map. So the cream colour is class 1. You'll see from there that about 95% of Renfrewshire was class 1. We had isolated pockets of class 2 up to 4 here and there, and in most cases that was in our sort of less densely populated areas. This is the current version of the map. So this is the 1 kilometre free version that Russell was speaking about earlier on, colour coded according to the worst case situation within it. So it presents an overestimate of the areas affected. So this time round we have up to class 6 in Renfrewshire. You'll see out in the very western tip there, it looks like a lot of class 6 going on there, but we don't have anyone living out there. So again, that's not as much of an issue for us. But you will note this lovely big strip running all the way from Johnston through Paisley to Renfrew, associated with Paisley Ruck fault zone. So this is a bit of a perfect storm of circumstances for us. It is only a narrow strip, about 300 to 400 metres wide. Once you look at the 25-metre licensed data set, but it runs through our 3 most densely populated areas. If this feature was present a couple of hundred metres to the north, we wouldn't really have had much of an issue. So it's a wee bit of an oddity. We've done a bit of work in this, and we know that about 3,600 addresses in Renfrewshire are in potentially radon affected areas, so that's including the class 2 to 4s out with the Paisley Ruck. And about 2,850, I think, of those are shown to be residential properties. So key question, I guess, that we're all wanting to discuss today is whose responsibility is radon? I think it's a really, really good question. And the answer, as far as I can tell so far, is it falls across so many different service areas that it's really hard to define within the council who should be taking the lead overall. The council itself has obviously got a corporate duty of care to tenants to provide homes that are fit for human habitation, and responsibilities as employer under health and safety legislation to carry out radon risk assessments of our workplaces and buildings, and that includes in radon affected areas testing for elevated radon. So it seems off the top of your head that there's quite an obvious responsibility or duty for services like corporate health and safety, housing, estates management, facilities management. CLOs in our authority, we sit within the environmental public health team. So there's not necessarily an obvious reason for us to be taking the lead in this. However, when the new maps came out at the back end of 2022, we became aware of that quite quickly and have been driving a wee bit of awareness within other services in the council. We focus this mainly on services that we interact with on a daily basis, so planning and building standards. So from the outset, we were making sure that comments and conditions where necessary were being added on to new planning applications and building warrants. And we were also then checking those maps when we were reviewing site investigations and remediation strategies. Just a quick point in terms of general awareness raising, we obviously also handle environmental inquiries, and we do advise inquirers when they come to ask about a site, whether if it's in a radon affected area, we'll make them aware of that, whether they ask about it or not. So in early 2024, we became aware of a proposal for some new build council housing on a site that falls within the class 6 area. The council is currently in year 4 of a 10-year housing-led regeneration and renewal programme for 8 areas across Paisley, Renfrew and Johnston. So of course, one of those sites is going to fall within the Paisley Ruck fault zone. I'm not going to say too much more about the new builds because that's actually fairly straightforward to deal with. It's going through the planning permission and building warrant process at the minute. And the houses will be built with full radon protection. Oh, sorry. They'll be built with full radon protection, and once they're occupied, we will test to make sure that the protection measures are working properly. I think it's fair to say that across then 2024, there was a growing awareness across various services in the council, that there were implications for the changes to these maps, both to new build properties, but also to existing council assets. So what role can the CLO play in all this? Because as John had mentioned earlier on, naturally occurring radon, which we're dealing with here, is specifically excluded from Part 2A and the radioactive conlands regulations. However, we do have a lot of skills and experience that, excuse me, make us perhaps well placed and in some cases better placed than colleagues in other services to undertake this kind of work. So we have robust technical and scientific skills, and we're comfortable working with maps. And in our team, we've got extensive GIS experience and skills that allow us to utilise the map layers that we already hold. So another thing I wasn't really aware of until I started working this project was just how many other services don't use spatial data and maps. So that's been a bit of an eye-opener to me, trying to communicate information without using a map. We've also got good understanding of ground conditions in geology and environmental chemistry. We're used to dealing with the assessment of risk to human health, and also communicating and contextualising those risks for a wider audience. So within Renfrewshire, we sit within the wider public and environmental health team, and that team's got really good working relationships established with the public health specialists in our local NHS health board at Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So one thing we did quite early on in our programme was bring in the consultant in public health medicine, who did a preliminary epidemiological study for us and concluded that there's no statistically significant difference in lung cancer incidence between people living in the radon affected areas in Renfrewshire and the wider NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board area. It was a really positive thing for us to have in our back pocket before we embarked on this monitoring programme. So it's more a case of checking to make sure we don't have a problem rather than dealing with something that's a complete unknown. I'm not going to leave this slide up for any time. I just wanted to really touch on it. One of the things that's quite interesting to me again when I started looking at this is the level of risk that we're talking about. Key thing, I suppose, is that exposure to radon is a non-threshold risk, so there is no safe dose. The cumulative risk is much greater for smokers than non-smokers. And as I think Robert mentioned earlier on, there's about a 16% increase in risk for everyone for every 100 becquerel per cubic metre increase. I just really wanted to compare the numbers and levels of risk we're looking at with radon to the numbers that we're used to dealing with in Conland risk assessments. So if you see on the table there at the 200 action level, for a non-smoker, it's a 1 in 190 risk of developing lung cancer, and it's 1 in 5 for non-smokers, for smokers. So it's quite interesting when you compare this against the level of risk that we're used to dealing with for Conland. So for minimal risk numbers that we might see under planning, like the suitable for use levels, they're based on an excess lifetime cancer risk of 1 per 100,000. And the C4SLs, which are not minimal risk but low level of risk, it's an excess lifetime cancer risk of 1 to 50,000. So it's quite a difference in the degree of risk that we're looking at here. So when we set off in this, I think we thought it would be a lot more straightforward than it's actually turned out to be. So how we thought it would work is that we would work out how many council properties we have in potentially radon affected areas. We would establish a working group, so we'd make sure that other people across the council in different departments knew what we were doing and why. We'd order some test kits from the Security Agency, put them in the properties and monitor for 3 months and get some results at the end of it. So far, so good. The first task we managed to complete quite easily. We used ArcGIS Pro to query existing council layers to identify all the council assets that we've got within radon affected areas. So that's everything that's above a class 1. I tend to focus on the Paisleyruck fault zone mostly, mainly because it's the highest risk at class 6, and about 98% of the properties that we found were actually in this area. So it turns out we've got about 500 existing council homes within these potentially affected areas, as well as a smaller number of other council and leisure facilities, including 2 nurseries, 5 primary schools and a couple of libraries. Robert's presentation's already covered potential issues with basements in detail. We have identified some buildings with basements that are occupied above the 50 hours per year, I think it is, that's recommended, that are not within radon affected areas. And we are monitoring a couple of them as part of this programme just now. It is something that we're going to be looking at in future, but I'm not really going to talk any more about it here because we don't actually have a list of council buildings with basements. So it's a much more longer term programme to identify them and get in and monitor. So we set up the working group, and that's where things started to get a little bit more complicated in terms of the engagement and the consultation that we needed to go through. So this was a group that we set up originally in January 2025 with the first meeting of our core working group, which had cross-departmental representatives from housing, education, facilities management. A key player in this group is the corporate communications team who were involved from the outset, and that was a really good move to get them involved early. I'm not going to go through in detail everything that appears on this slide, but I think suffice it to say that we realised quite early on that the consultation and engagement process was much more wide-ranging than we felt it had to be at the outset. So this is all people that we engaged with before anything went public. And the elected members, excuse me, keeping elected members informed as well of what we were doing was a really important thing to do. So we wrote a board report that went to boards, and we gave proactive briefings to the councillors. Our comms team also gave proactive press briefings just to remind them about responsible reporting and not setting people worrying about something that they really shouldn't be worrying too much about. We updated our webpage content and everything all went live at the same time to make sure that the information was available to everyone. And anyone who wanted more could find out more on our website, which then had links off to the HSA. Externally, excuse me, we engaged with HSA and the BGS in the early stages, just when we were figuring out the logistics of the programme, and also the local NHS team. helped us out with the available health statistics. The key thing that we also undertook was actually consultation with other local authorities. We are definitely not the first to look at this, and we have benefited greatly from discussions with colleagues who've already developed similar programmes and done these projects before. I'm not sure if any of them are on the call this morning, but we were really very pleased to learn from their experiences. It saved us reinventing the wheel, and we're really grateful for the advice that they gave us. So I'll just talk a little bit now about what we're actually doing at the moment. So we have an ongoing programme in council houses and flats. So early on, we took the decision to limit the initial monitoring to council houses and ground floor flats only. This was based on informal advice from the HSA, and it reduced the number of properties that we were looking at from about 500 to 300. We felt this was quite a pragmatic solution, given the kind of degree of unknowns we were dealing with, and the need to we're not made of money, so we had to make sure that we're making good use of funds. We thought this was quite a pragmatic way to approach it. We can look at monitoring upper floors in later phases, although assuming that radon's coming from the ground, we're assuming that it's going to be highest at the ground floor level. Any action that we take to deal with it on the lower floors will have a consequent benefit onto upper floors. We sent out an introductory letter to the tenants who are going to be affected, and we included a lot of information in there, including signposting to the UK Radon website, which I would absolutely support what everyone else has been saying. That's an absolute goldmine of resource and information for people. And we also included the helpline number for the UKHSA if anyone had any inquiries or questions or concerned. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that we were raising awareness in the wider community so that everyone knew what was happening. So we also sent the letters to adjacent private owners and our own tenants on upper floors who we weren't monitoring at this point, just to give them a bit of information, particularly for the private owners, to advise them on how they could go about getting a test for themselves if they wanted to. There was quite a bit of concern internally at the early stages of planning this project, and we anticipated that we would get a lot of interest from the public and potentially the press. So we put together a dedicated web page. We also set up a dedicated phone line and an email mailbox to field any inquiries and make sure they would come to the relevant officers quickly. So in the operational phase of things, given the logistical difficulties of getting kits into such a large number of properties quickly, Tracy might touch on this later on, but the kits are always monitored once they're produced, even when they're in their packets. So once you order them, you really have to get them to where they need to go within a few days if possible. So we opted to send the kits out directly to the tenants, and our colleagues in housing then followed up with tenants about 2 or 3 weeks into the monitoring period, just to make sure that they'd received their kits and to check whether they had deployed them or had any issues, or gave us a good opportunity to address any concerns that people would have as well. We followed that up with targeted emails to any tenants that we hadn't managed to speak to on the phone, and then put out some social media posts on Facebook groups just to catch anyone who maybe didn't answer the phone or check their mail. So across these various rounds of consultation, we've spoken to over half the tenants that received a kit. And of the folk that we spoke to, about 80% said they'd received it and deployed it with no issues. A few other folk needed a bit of assistance with it or just hadn't got around to doing it. So we're anticipating a reasonable return rate, fingers crossed. In the last couple of weeks, we're coming towards the end of the monitoring period now. So we sent out reminder letters to people, and we included in that a replacement copy of the questionnaire that comes with the kit, which includes information about the construction of the building and the household itself and how the property is used. And also a replacement free post label that in case people had lost the one that came with their kit, just to try and maximise returns and make it as easy as possible for folk to participate. And we've also done monitoring in schools. So this is a few shots of myself and my colleague Amy just deploying the radon detectors in schools. So we've got 7 establishments across 5 different buildings, so 2 nurseries and 5 schools. We went in and placed these during the in-service days, just at the end of the school summer holidays. Which was actually great because it gave us a good opportunity to talk to the staff. Excuse me. And we got quite a lot of feedback on where would be a good place to put them, where would not be a good place to put them, just depending on how the buildings are used and the kind of activities that go on in different places. It was sometimes quite hard to actually find ideal locations to put them, but we did the best we could. We opted to put them into almost every room, with the exception of sort of changing rooms, toilets and circulation spaces. And the feedback from a lot of the staff that we spoke to was that they were all quite glad to have a detector in their office or classroom or wherever they spent most of their time. And the practicalities of it, we cable tied them on wherever we possibly could. And we were kind of mindful of trying to put them up at not too high above head height, but above the height where the kids might be able to reach them. Put them behind the teachers' desks or attached onto various bits of furniture. And put up little signs as well next to them, just so that anyone who's in the rooms knows what they are in case they ended up falling off the wall or get lost, or people didn't know what they were or had suspicions that they were something else. The key thing from this really was just it was dead handy to get into the schools and talk to the staff. And the bonus in doing that was that some of them were local residents, and we were able to check that they'd received their residential test kit as well, and deployed that, so it was good. So just to finish off, then the next steps for us, we're coming to the end of the 3-month monitoring period in the residential properties. The commercial and workplace programme, which I haven't really talked about in this presentation, it relates to quite a small number of properties. That'll be done in October 2025, and we'll be going into schools mid-November, excuse me, to take the detectors back out of there. So we're anticipating getting some initial results and a wee bit of advice from the HSA from November this year. UK Radon Awareness Week also happens to coincide with that quite nicely, so that's running from the 3rd to the 7th of November this year. And we're planning some social media and communications activities just to again raise a bit of awareness in the wider community. The key thing for us just now is sort of pulling together a bit of succession planning for moving the responsibility for the ongoing part of the monitoring programme onto the relevant services rather than us having to keep dealing with it. So whatever the results turn out to be, there is going to be a requirement for monitoring at like 5 or 10 year intervals, or after a change in tenancy, or if buildings get upgraded. Sort of energy efficiency programmes going on at the minute to replace windows and insulation, so we'll need a bit of a retest after that. Our idea would be that the relevant services take that on, and we're just in a more supporting role rather than managing the whole programme moving on. The final thing for us to complete will be the monitoring in the new build houses once they're occupied. So the build's due to complete by August next year. So that'll be the last thing that we do. About a year from now, we'll be monitoring those properties just to confirm that everything's okay. So that's where we are right now. Got an interesting few months coming up. But thanks very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Laura. Fascinating. It's really interesting to hear that the other authorities have done similar projects. I was only aware, obviously, from this that you were the only authority who've kind of been doing something like this. So that's really interesting. I'll pass over to Phil for questions. Thanks, Phil.
Hi, thanks, Laura. Really good. I think the first question, did you volunteer to undertake the project, or were you asked to do this? Did you not step back quick enough?
That's an excellent question. I think it was more a case of we kind of highlighted it to other services and assumed that they would then take it on, but they were quite happy that we have a kind of a background in it and we would kind of lead on it. So I kind of accidentally volunteered myself, I suppose, more than deliberately doing it. But...
Well done then. Just to clarify, I think somebody might have misheard you or heard you, Rob. You're saying that you will test new builds that radon protection measures are working. Is that right?
In the council buildings, yeah, the new council houses.
Oh, in council buildings. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, it's one particular site. So it's a council new build site that's on the Class 6 area. As part of the testing. And
there was another question here. What are your thoughts on the difference between the ELCR for radon and the general CL values?
I'm not sure. I put that in there just to kind of highlight the difference more than anything. Like, we're used to kind of dealing with what appears to be relatively low risk compared with the radon side of things. So
right.
It's just something that I found quite interesting when we started working this, looking at the level of risk even at the action level. Like, there's obviously no safe level, but the degree of risk at that level is actually quite significant. I thought when you compare it to, if you're getting the 16% increase for every 100, then just found it quite interesting.
Yeah. And then I think a more general question. So around about sort of costs and time and how you've accessed funding and resources, and how do you convince the political leaders to sort of get this off the ground, if you like?
I think that wasn't me. That's the first thing to say. But I think we had I think if we didn't have the new build housing involved, I think we would have a more difficult time convincing people this is something that they should have picked up and acted on. But I think we were quite fortunate in a way that once we had the kind of buy-in from housing, also kind of started to fall into place after that. Senior managers, obviously, if you're looking at new houses, the the penny dropped quite quickly. There would be an implication for existing properties as well. And the costs, the cost to do an individual property is not enormous. I think that helped us as well. That it's about £50 per property. So given the number of properties we were looking at, the costs, I mean, they're significant, but they're not outrageous. And I think because we've gone from a class 1 to a class 6, there's quite a degree of interest and concern from senior management quite early on.
Lovely. And just a very, very quick one. Was it led by yourselves or UKHSA?
Was what, sorry, led by us?
The project led by yourselves or UKHSA?
It's led by us. We designed it all, so we looked at,
Yeah.
we figured out where all our properties were, and then engaged with them to do the kind of logistical side of it and supply the monitors and that kind of thing.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Laura. And I'm not going to be last to comment on your Cadbury's logo and colouring there. So everybody will be off for chocolate at lunchtime.
Yeah, I thought it might have been a Paisley background, but I suppose that'd be a bit too busy for a background. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for that, Phil. I think there may be some other questions in the Q&A, so perhaps Laura can get to those later, or we can submit those and get some answers at a later point. And we'll now break. Welcome back, everyone. Today's final presentation, From Measurements to Maps, Everything in Between and What They Mean, by Tracy Gooding, the UK Health Security Agency. NCLOG is delighted to be joined by the UK Health Security Agency today. Tracy joined the National Radiological Protection Board in 1988, later becoming the Health Protection Agency, Public Health England and UK Health Security Agency, and has worked mostly on radon, focusing on workplace measurement and control, including work for mines, a national radon programme for schools, radon exhalation from building materials, and contributing to the 2013 Euratom Basic Safety Standards Directives and its requirements, such as the National Radon Action Level. Tracy is a principal radiation protection scientist at the Radon Group and Radon Group leader, a chartered physicist, and has a master's in radiation environment protection from the University of Surrey. Over to you, Tracy.
Right, thank you. It's always the scary bit when you get to share your presentation.
Got it. It's working. Thank
Got
you.
it? Right, great. Okay, measurements to maps. It's actually pulling together an awful lot of stuff that other people have spoken about today. So there's these bits that are going to be very familiar to you, and then a little bit further on how we've actually measured, how we've used it, and some of the other ways that we've actually been creating these maps over the years. So why we measure, I think that's going to be pretty clear. The variations, the various different sorts of equipment, and actually show you some of the maps, how we got to where we are at the moment. Some will be familiar, some will be a sort of blast from the past. I'm getting to the point in my career when I'm saying, back in the day, we used to do this. And last word on basements as well. Basements have been a particular interest. So thanks very much for telling me that I need to update my basement report because we've changed the affected areas now. And here's our lovely grey building out in Oxfordshire, still in the same building. It went up in 1974 and it certainly looks like it. So the radon geology, I mean, Russell went through this in an awful lot more detail, but you can have identical looking houses sitting right next door to each other, but because of what's going on underneath, they will have different radon levels. Plus you add in people's own way of living, their own heating and ventilation. What about the uses of that particular building? Building materials, we have not yet found a particular building material that produces so much radon that it will on its own put you above the house action level. But it's something that NCLOG put out a consultative document back in 2022. They got the results from it and I haven't done anything with it yet. So watch this space, but don't expect anything very, very quickly. But anyway, we can predict the radon potential, and that's what the map is all about. But it's very hard when somebody says, I've got a radon result of X thousand becquerel per meter cubed, and I know my next door neighbor, they told me they've got 50. Your measurements are wrong. No, they're not. It's just reality. And that's been the real joy and pain of radon, that everybody is different. It's so variable. It would be very nice if we could predict the individual radon level in a particular house or other building. And I know there's some groups that have sort of got the AI together and used the multifactorial analysis and said, we think your radon level is, well, it might improve the potential estimate, but it's not going to give you a final result. You still need to test, and I think that's probably just going to continue for beyond the end of my career. And this is what we're up against. It is so variable. This is real. This is a school that's down in Cornwall, and the wind direction massively changed the radon level. Note the log scale on the left. We did some radon measurements with some passive monitors, and they got someone in with a different sort of monitor, and he said, "We think you're wrong because the radon levels are really low." We went down to the school with some different sorts of monitors, said, well, actually, they're also really high. And who was right? And the answer was, we all were, because radon levels just were hugely variable, and it's about the wind blowing across the building or against the building. Depending on wind direction, it was across ventilation under the floor, the air bricks. You can see how much it changed on an individual school. So there's your average radon concentration. It was really just about 300 becquerel per meter cubed, annual average equivalent. But it went up and down and all over the shop. It was fixed. It got down to a much lower radon concentration. But this is why we measure over the long term. Is it really important that it was 3,000 yesterday and 30 today? Well, yeah, because it's going to be quite high. You've got the potential there. But if you even things out, it will show you whether you've got a problem. More generally, you've got this seasonal variation. Higher in the winter when everything's shut up. You've got that stack effect because you're a nice warm building inside, cold outside. In the summer, we did actually have a summer in southern England this year. Windows are open, the temperature inside the building was the same as the temperature outside the building, all very nice. Any radon that was drifting into the building just went straight out through the windows. So you do tend to get this pattern. This is most of the people most of the time. It's not absolutely everybody, but it's a really good way of being able to do radon measurements at any time of the year and estimate what the annual average is. And that's what the regulations and standards talk about, whether it be homes or workplaces. What is your annual average radon concentration? So how do you measure it? Well, if you want to have all that detailed information and you've got 10, 20,000 pounds burning a hole in your pocket, you can have some very posh stuff. Suitable for lab and research use. This is not the kind of thing that we're going to send out in the post to people. If we have these expensive instruments going out, basically somebody's going to keep serious control over them. So it's not the thing that you're going to use to measure thousands of homes and workplaces. They're very nice. They're great, in fact. They give you some lovely results. They do need calibrating. It's all good for research purposes, or if you're doing post-mitigation tests to see where exactly you've got a high result. But there's no such thing as an instant result, which is something that this lot need to worry about, because there's a lot of new electronic radon integration monitors, ERINs. There's loads of them on the market. They start at a couple of £100 and go up to about 1,000 or so, and they extol their virtues that they are the best thing since sliced bread. No, they're not. 10 years ago, I thought maybe we'd be going away from passive monitors to electronic monitors. They are often just not as good as advertised. Sometimes there's a problem with batteries. Sometimes there's a problem with, well, actually just the thing is not measuring what it's meant to be measuring. For instance, there was a particular instrument that actually was a witch best buy. Turned out it never gave you a high result. So people loved it, of course, because it would never actually read the high result. So that was actually withdrawn from market. So there are some definite drawbacks with these sorts of things. So we did quite a lot of tests on them over several years. We gave them a hard time. We gave them some high radon levels to measure, which should have been great. We gave them some low radon measurements to levels to measure. How well did they perform? Well, just as an illustration, I'll show you the next slide where they're sitting in our radon chamber. When you've got a lot of radon, these instruments should be in a very happy range. They're not very sensitive, so if you give them a lot of radon, they should be measuring perfectly. Now you'll see there's a bit of variation between those instruments. You look at their current level or the long-term average and the ones over the last 7 or 1 day. Fairly close, actually, not too bad. Apart from the fact the radon concentration in the radon chamber was about 5,000 becquerel per meter cubed, not 9. So the accuracy and the precision of these things can often leave a lot to be desired. So even when they box fresh instruments, they do need recalibrating. So that suddenly gives you a cost when you first use them and a cost every year thereafter, because they do change their calibrations. They can just suddenly go wild and either measure twice or half what they used to. So there's a lot of things to be thinking about. So this is a good reason why we use the passive monitors. And you can, you type in that link, and my computer is about to restart. No, it isn't. That will give you all the details that we did, a lot of tests that we did on these particular instruments. So back to radon gas passive monitors. Here's one with a UK Health Security Agency. We keep changing our name, so we keep having to change the outer shell of the radon detector so it reflects our latest name. Inside, you just got this strip of CR39 plastic. A lot of you wearing glasses. That's just the same stuff you've got in your glasses. So you're actually recording the radon levels all the time. The radon can diffuse inside the radon detector, but what it does is excludes dust and anything else that might be lurking in the air. So it's just looking at the radon. If that radon atom decays whilst it's inside the detector, and it happens to go in the direction of the CR39 element, the energy of that alpha particle is enough to shatter the polymer of the plastic. If you want to make it show up, then you chemically etch it. So the detector, from the little blue image, that's how it starts off. That etched number just matches the outside of the detector, with the dots are machine readable code. The etched one on the right, we know it's got to been exposed to a very high radon concentration. We really hope that somebody doesn't come back with something looking absolutely as sandblasted as that. We know that there's somebody actually testing just how high our radon levels could be read. So they don't give you any information on whether the radon concentration was high at 8 o'clock in the morning or at the start or the end of the measurement. It just gives you that exposure, and then you divide it by the exposure time, and they normally go out for 3 months, and that will give you your radon concentration, becquerel per meter cubed. It's quite a big lab setup. Those 3 desks correspond to 3 platforms. We actually put these etch detectors onto those platforms. It goes through an image analysis system, and it tells you what the exposure was in the detector, and then links back to all the calibration data that we have for each of those individual passive detectors before they went out. So there's a good quality control scheme to show how well the detectors need to be performing, their usable range, and also what you need to do results. So that's a reasonably readable document. It also shows you the seasonal correction factors that we used to get from what we measured to the annual average radon concentration. And there's quite a variation across a building. So for homes, we do 1 detector in a living area, 1 detector in a bedroom, and we combine them to give a slightly weighted house average. When you're in a home, it's assumed you spend slightly more time in a bedroom than you do in a living area. And that doesn't include people who are then working from home, which is a whole different thing again. And that's then compared to the action level of 200 becquerel per meter cubed annual average radon concentration. Then there's the target level, for instance, if you're looking at mitigation work, or if you're a current or ex-smoker, that's more relevant to you. Workplaces, interesting to hear from Renfrewshire that they would like to do every single room. That's often what people say we'd like to do. And my thing is, yeah, great, knock yourself out. You then have to negotiate with who's holding the purse strings. At a minimum, you're using 1 detector for every 100 square meters, so 10 by 10. And if it's open plan and you can see multiple detectors from where you're standing, that's too many. But don't try and start sort of predicting, is this the same air? You do need to spread them throughout the building. Don't stack them all at one end, or somebody has their own office and everything around them because they're really keen on it. Certainly in school, if you had something like head teacher, that usually concentrates the mind. And also you need to have someone like the caretaker of a building in a workplace. They need to be fully on board with this. Otherwise you will not get all the detectors back. Something might happen to them that is bad. In schools, yeah, it's really good to cable tie them on because they do have a habit of disappearing if you don't either fix them firmly to a piece of equipment, especially health and safety equipment, or put them up higher. And they do look a bit more sinister these days. They used to be bright yellow, they're now black, which improves their performance because it's a carbon-loaded detector. That takes away any static charge. But they look a little bit more sinister. So people say, what's that? It's a gas monitor. And then you usually get a comment, yeah, there's a lot of gas in here. But you do need to focus on occupied rooms. And also something that's come up recently from an email that I've just answered yesterday, they measured during the school summer holidays and they were surprised that the results were high. Well, yeah, if your school, if your other building is unoccupied, you're going to get some wonky results out of it. They're going to read high in the summer because you're not ventilating as you normally would, and they're going to read low in the winter because you're not heating as you normally would. So keep it when the place is occupied, and that includes even individual rooms. So with a workplace, you've got your highest result. It's not a building average, it's your highest result is then compared to the threshold for the ionizing radiations regulations 2017, 300 becquerel per meter cubed, annual average again. These were also illustrating, if you don't do every room, you might miss the high results. That 420 in the middle, that was actually an atrium. It was an open little quadrangle that they got some money, closed it off, made an internal room, and that had one of the highest results as well. So how do you get from these measurements to a map? So we've talked a lot about maps. So we only use measurements in dwellings in this country. I've seen Republic of Ireland are starting to use workplaces as well. That's because they have fewer house measurements, and they have they're looking for all the measurements that they can because they have a lot of area that doesn't have anybody living in it. So they need all the data they can get. For us in the UK, the workplace variety, size, usage, all sorts of shapes and sizes. What's the right result to use it? Do you use the maximum? Do you use the average? Well, it's not actually an average. Is it the mean? Is it the median? Is it the arithmetic mean? Is it the geometric mean? What's the distribution of radon across a single workplace? Some of them are log normal, but there's no sort of obvious value that you could use. So we need a large number of results for that joint data set mapping, the stuff where you combine the radon gas measurements in houses and the geology. But the quality control that we have to use for our radon measurements, well, you can see it here. We have to make sure that the measurements are right and they are located in the right areas as well. So rather than just say, here's your data set, just knock yourself out, pull them in together, you actually got to do a lot of data cleaning. So this is a very large program. When you think we had an extra 560,000 radon measurements to do the new GB map, that's an awful lot of sifting through measurements. And all this was done during COVID times. So that was great. Lots of people working from home on some fairly rickety Wi-Fi in their own home. So it slowed things down. It wasn't great fun. We're also using pre-mitigation results. There's no point in trying to put something that's been fixed because that really doesn't represent what the house is. One thing we need to consider is that we've got building regulations that have changed over the years to try and make houses radon proof. How do we deal with those? Because that's no longer really a new house built on a particular geology. If it influences too much, because all the houses are fixed that we've measured, all of them got radon prevention work, is that a true reflection? You can start saying, well, actually, it's moved down a level, and you start taking off the radon prevention. So we've got to consider exactly what we're going to be doing with all those results in the future. So this is where we started from National Survey in the 1980s with early versions of the passive detectors. This was done on a population-weighted basis, plus going back to some areas that we thought would be interesting. So you can see Southwest England showing up, some areas in the Midlands, a few areas in Scotland, a few bits and pieces in Northern Ireland. So it came up with an idea, but the maps we produced just showed what we had actually measured rather than any kind of prediction. Sorry. It also had an action level for homes set at 400 becquerel per meter cubed. The annual average, but that was because we were measuring over a whole year rather than the 3 months that we do now. And the first affected areas came in, it's really freeform. It looks about the right areas. We changed the action level to 200 becquerel per meter cubed, which is where we've been ever since, although the target level got introduced later. And it introduced the concept of a radon affected area, being actually at or above the action level. So we just ended up with sort of ideas of radon affected areas, but what did they mean? Well, it had a lot of links through to the building regulations. So this is what we came up with in 1990, and that's stayed the same ever since. The affected areas have changed, but the application of has remained the same. So homes with precautions against radon should be constructed in accordance with approved guidance. And that's in England, for instance, is BR211. So we completed the first national map. We started to look at geometric mean radon concentration. We know that radon levels are log normal distributed, so most of them are down at the low end, but they're very long tail at higher radon levels. And this is starting to look quite a familiar shape, but we're ending up with areas that couldn't be mapped because there was nobody living there. And this is the disadvantage of just using radon. So we tried different colour schemes. That's blue. It looks like it should be, is this rainfall or what? It doesn't really say radon bad, radon doing something about it. It just sort of, here we have a thing. So just a quick explanation about log normal. So looking at some radon data that we've got in the left-hand side, we've got the radon measurements as we found them. And you can see there's a lot stacked up against the low areas, and then it has a long tail. If you take the log of every single result, you transform it into the geometric distribution. So you've got a geometric mean and a geometric standard deviation rather than normal mean and normal standard deviation. And that gives you much better way of estimating what percentage of that data set will come above the action level or any other threshold that you happen to set. So that works for the radon levels, and then you start delineating them according to, are they on the same geology? And that's how we start to link the two things, the radon measurements that we have done in the homes and the geology. So we started to do this is just a radon only map again. And a lot of methods was trying to infill and smooth. Then we got onto the Scotland map. Once again, you'll see that there's areas that are missing. Northern Ireland starting to get in a bit more detail there. There's our previous map, which was the first of the joint data sets, radon and geology. And then we've got onto the current map, which is the current colours were changed, increased accessibility for people who are colourblind. No white areas. It's not that we didn't have any radon or no radon measurements, it's that it was genuinely low. Also tells them apart. And the Northern Ireland, we didn't remap, but we did change the colours. And broadly, here were the changes. But for individuals, of course, if you're in a particular area that has a lot of changes, then you will see particular changes. So what looked like a very sort of minor change turned out to be quite significant for some people. We updated the building regulations, and in Scotland, you've got this lovely domestic site preparation standard, which is really pulling in an awful lot more information about radon, and that's really good. It needs to be extended to workplaces, and I would love that to be throughout the whole of the UK. And then launching the radon map is a major event. We told lots and lots of people and got lots of things together, and there were still a lot of people who said we didn't hear anything about it. So we did trail it quite extensively, but there's still, it affects a lot of people in different ways. And planning, when you've had planning consent from one radon map and then we changed to a different radon map, yes, it was quite painful during that changeover period. So yes, there was a lot of quite robust communications happened around that time. Communicating change, it was quite difficult, but we did try and tell as many people as possible in a timely way. But nobody likes change. They were quite happy to keep with the old map. And just to let you know that there's no danger of us updating that map in the near future. You need to do some significant changes to the geology, a significant increase in the number of radon measurements to actually make it worthwhile. It's in such fine detail. Our precision and accuracy we're happy with, otherwise we wouldn't have released it in the first place. And then just the last thing on basements. All locations expected to be at higher risk. Don't rely on the map. You're surrounded by the source. And if you go onto ukraradon.org, when it actually gets updated, we've got some new text that's coming on. So if you're in a less than 1% area, so you're not actually a radon affected area, but it is starting to highlight basement, and the HSE have highlighted basements for quite some time. And yes, that analysis of radon levels in the basements of UK workplaces, it will be updated at some point, but there's an awful lot more to be done before then. So in conclusions, you can't predict the indoor radon concentration. You need to look at the maps. They're the best thing that you have, but they're not perfect. They are a tool. They're a tool for houses. They're a tool for workplace risk assessments. Don't forget basements. That map, it's not a dynamic map. It does not change all the time. That map that we published in December 22 is the same map that you will see on the website. So any other maps, they're not current. There are other data that's been put onto it. That map is going to stay as it is for the foreseeable future. And if you're interested in radon, give me send me an email, because we've got another Radon forum. That's in person at Chiltern in Oxfordshire. That's on the 4th of November, which is Radon Action Week. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Tracy. That's a great way to conclude today's presentations. I'll pass over to Phil for questions. Phil.
Hi. Thanks for that, Tracy. Really interesting presentation. Just some questions here. Doubled up question. First one, how effective the monitors that you talked about? How effective are they with identified at low concentrations?
Over a 3-month period, if you have something like 10 becquerel per meter cubed, then they are good, down to 10 becquerel per meter cubed. Certainly the ones that we use. If you're less than 10 becquerel per meter cubed, we'll just put less than 10 becquerel per meter cubed. But it's so low that nobody really cares. Around about the action levels or target levels, 100, 200 becquerel per meter cubed, yeah, that's in their optimized range. So they will tell you whether you are above or below the action level. And that's actually one of the points where the electronic monitors really fell down. Setting a radon concentration in a chamber at 200 becquerel per meter cubed, some very fancy instruments, none of these low-cost monitors got that 200. They were all well above it. So that's definitely the difference between the passive and the active monitors. At the lower levels, 50, 100, 200, 300, the passive monitors are within a couple of % of what we consider to be true, what we have measured against primary standards.
Okay, yeah. Slightly related, I think, and looking at your detectors, that the black disc things. I'm just mindful of going back to passive diffusion tube days, where we talked about sort of plus or minus 30% on an O2 diffusion tube. Is there a rough figure for your detectors there in terms of
for the validation scheme? Yeah, they need to be sort of plus or minus 15%. Ours are normally running at about plus or minus less than 5%.
Right, with all your corrections and your brilliant. Yeah, it's really good. Does UKHSA have an approved list of monitors? I probably know your answer, but
yeah, you can get that. It's the people who have passed the validation scheme. So the validation scheme asks you to retest every 6 months. Then there's also an intercomparison, and there's an intercomparison report that we put actually on our website. It shows how well or badly various people are doing, but that's anonymized. But yeah, the people who've passed the validation scheme, so are suitable for using passive radon detectors in the UK. Yeah, if you contact me, I'll get that to you.
Okay, thank you. And last one, through planning and building control, isn't the target level more appropriate to consider rather than
the action level?
Yeah, the action level. Sorry. Yeah.
You have to put a level somewhere. The World Health Organization say you should have your action level somewhere between 100 and 300. Most countries in Europe have got theirs up at 300. We put ours at 200. That was set so that we thought it could be fixed or prevented. 200 was a reasonable level, and it wasn't creating too massive a problem. If you're down at 100 becquerel per meter cubed, Lawley Antonio was saying they haven't seen a combined radon and geology map. I've seen a radon only map that was using 100 becquerel per meter cubed, and it was scary. You think there's a lot of radon affected areas from our current map. It would look an awful lot worse than that. It's probably about 3 times as many affected areas. So you're probably looking at about half the country there. If you want to use 100 becquerel per meter cubed, that's up to you, but 200 is the action level. 100 is really for those people who are going to be at higher risk, the smokers and the ex-smokers, or it's a target if you're doing the mitigation work. Don't just squeak it below 200, get it down as far as you reasonably can.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Back to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Tracy.
Stop sharing.
Thank you very much.